actually a little bit weird not to say good morning, but good afternoon instead, so we are starting a bit late to make sure that everybody arrives on time. It's quite a difficult destination, Strasbourg is. We know that some of our speakers had to have like 5 legs to get here, so we appreciate that you are with us. My name is Natalia Arnaud, and I'm president and founder of the Free Russia Foundation. So let me open our event today in Strasbourg. Again, thank you all for being here. This conference, and actually even a bigger awareness campaign, Rethink the Deal, is brought to you by the Coalition of Pro-Democracy Russians. We had to leave our homeland for various reasons, and we are now based in many countries, here in France, in Germany, in Lithuania, in Estonia, in Ukraine, in the US, many other countries. But we all care about our homeland, and we care about behavior of our country as a global citizen. And we understand that Nord Stream 2 is a very political project. It's not just a commercial deal. As I said, it's our third conference. We already conducted 2 events. On September 26th, we had our first conference in The Hague. On October 10th, we had our second event in Berlin. Those 2 conferences were attended by hundreds, followed online by thousands, and lots of comments, feedback after that. But here in Strasbourg, we decided we want to reformat. We wanted to gather a very exclusive, but a very powerful, very good audience, so that you can all help us brainstorm on what else can be done regarding this deal and regarding Kremlin's energy propaganda and its pipeline politics. For this awareness campaign, we are not only conducting conferences, we have developed very substantial, very in-depth, groundbreaking reports that are available on our campaign page, rethinkthedeal.eu. Please, if you haven't done so, please visit, comment, give us your feedback. We have the recommendations for the governments and civil societies in Germany, in the Netherlands, in France, and also questions for the media in those 3 countries. We are not going to stop this campaign, and so again, your feedback is very much appreciated. Later, we'll have an event inside the European Parliament. Again, if you want to help us with messages for MEPs, we will be very thankful to that. We initiated this discussion because we felt that this issue wasn't studied well enough. The more and more we studied, we actually were amazed ourselves how huge is energy propaganda around this topic, and that it's not actually beneficial for Europe. It impacts a lot of, it impacts the unity of the European Union. There is a lot of corruption around this deal. It's a huge security threat. It's not very good for environment. It really violates many natural reserves and ecosystems. It deprives many indigenous people of their livelihood. So it's a lot of problems to this project. And also what we noticed that just a few governments and big corporations decided to make this deal without asking people. That's why we wanted, again, for us, pro-democracy Russians, we don't like it, but we are not saying stop Nord Stream 2 or something more radical. We are saying let's rethink it, let's discuss all possible aspects of this deal. So today we'll have 2 panels. We'll have a working lunch with Mikhail Karchenko and Mikhail Krutykhin. The master of the ceremony will be Ilya Zaslavsky, my colleague and head of research of Free Russia Foundation. So let's start. Thank you.
So I will be very short. You have biographies of our speakers. There will be 2 presentations here from the podium, and then 2 panels will be speaking from the tables. Then we will try to leave time for Q&A. I have a request that when we come to Q&A, that which moderators will moderate, that people in the audience respect the procedures and just introduce themselves and state their affiliation and spend not more than 1-2 minutes on their questions at most. And now I would like to give floor to Mikhail Karchenkin, founder and journalist at European Gas Analysis, and a good friend of Free Russia Foundation. Please.
Thank you, Julian. The vast majority of Europeans and Russians get the wrong ideas about the Nord Stream 2 project. I think it's so many lies were and false promises were given by politicians, authorities of Gazprom, executives of Nord Stream 2 AG, heads of companies involved in the project. So the statements like those listed were repeated numerous times in the media, on TV, in interviews, promising that by Mr. Putin himself, the project doesn't target Ukraine's interests, the project is about diversification, blah, 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 and Nord Stream 2 gas can save 160 million tons of CO2. This is a perfect example how any statement repeated many times can become a sort of conventional wisdom. If you look back to earlier statements and current policies of Gazprom, they have always been promising that there will be no transit through Ukraine after the completion of Nord Stream 2 project, even if the sun and the moon switch places. And now with Turk Stream completed in the Black Sea, Gazprom can start waits until the completion of the Baltic Sea project to fulfill its dream. The website of Gazprom describes the so-called optimization program that is about physical liquidation of most pipelines delivering Russian gas from Siberia to the border of Ukraine. The huge export corridor through Ukraine will be replaced by a bit smaller new pipeline Nord Stream 2. So in fact, Gazprom is reducing the export capacity of Ukraine from 146 to 10 to 15 BCM, as the program says. So reduction of 130 and addition of 55. So totally it makes a negative result of reduction of total export gas capacity of Russia. So the whole project is about shipping gas through Germany instead of Ukraine and Slovakia. The project will ship same volumes of gas to the same customers by different route. So therefore there is no replacement of coal. We are talking about same 55 million cubic meters taken from Ukraine and sent to Germany. The only change is that Germany will get transit revenue instead of Ukraine and Slovakia. On top of that, Central Europe will get capacity bottlenecks and shortages of gas in winter, especially if the wind is low. Oops, here we go. Somehow the propaganda activities, the the lobbying campaign made ordinary Europeans and Russians believe that capacity reduction was actually the capacity expansion that would help the Green Deal of the European Union. And once again, if a new German pipeline, Hugo, which is being built right now, gets filled by gas taken from Ukrainian pipelines, the rest of Europe will get nothing but technical problems and higher costs of gas. And in my view, Nord Stream 2 is the result of a very well-mastered propaganda campaign of the Kremlin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikhail. And we will hopefully have some time for Q&A. And now I would like to introduce Mikhail Kurtikhin, founder and partner at Rus Energy Consulting.
Well, I also have some slides to show. First of all, I'd like to start with the quotation. The quotation from late Senator John McCain, who said, before dealing with Russia, we must understand whom we are dealing with. And when we have Gazprom, we see that this is not just a gas company. This is a very complicated affair, which is driven not only by commercial interests and commercial considerations, but also by some political interests and economical interests, but not of Russia, but of some specific groups of people who capitalize on politicized projects of Gazprom. Well, first of all, does this Nord Stream or South Stream projects, they have political sense for the Kremlin? Yes, definitely. And President Putin said so on several occasions. He said, for example, that when that pipelines can be political. He said that maybe the eastern pipelines of Russia can be connected to the western pipelines of Russia, and then Russia will be able to switch the flow of gas from Europe to China and from China to Europe, and then where the price is better, he said. But it was definitely an attempt at political blackmail. This is the problem of the president, because I think he does not look at the maps, the volume of the pipes that go westward and the volume of the one small pipe that is going to go across the Chinese border. And, well, the whole idea, yes, this is some sort of a political meaning. The political goals of the president were, well, such as punishing Ukraine, yes, and Ukraine gets about $2 billion a year from transit fees for Russian gas. But when the idea is to punish Ukraine by depriving it of this sum, the idea is let us build new pipelines regardless of costs. This is, well, a very expensive way of revenge against the Ukrainian regime. Then there is another goal, preventing the European nations from getting more Eastern European nations, from getting less dependence on Russia. And then, of course, it is using gas supply as a tool of political blackmail. Well, definitely those are the political goals. And Gazprom is organized in such a way that it is possible for some contractors who build pipelines to encourage the company to build more and more expensive pipelines and with oversized budgets make more profit. In fact, Gazprom is not only a political weapon, but it's also, it has another function of transferring state-controlled money into the pocket of private contractors who are very close friends of President Putin. Oh. Well, discuss do those streams have any value as logistical improvement? The Nord Stream, yes. And if you look at the route of the Nord Stream 1 or Nord Stream 2, it is shorter than by Ukraine. It does not cross several countries. It goes straight into the heart of Europe and makes Germany a hub for distributing Russian gas. And Germany can deliver that gas, if Ukraine is not included in the equation, as far as Italy, for example, by pumping this gas across the Czech Republic, Austria, and then into Italy. Then the Turkish stream is not logistically wise at all, because it is longer. It replaces Ukraine, which is a very good transit country. It has never broken any agreements with Gazprom for the past 10 years when they have a contract for transit of Russian gas. All the disruptions were made by the political will of the Russian president himself. And Turkey is not a very good client, not a very good transit country, because it has known to blackmail the Russian gas company with demands of discounts on gas price, on demands on cutting down the volumes it receives from Russia by the Blue Stream across the Black Sea, and so on and so forth. So there will be a lot of problems with Turkey, much more than there are commercial problems and logistical problems with Ukraine. Well, we have a document, and I will demonstrate to you the front page of the document, which is called the Program for Comprehensive Development of Yamal gas reserves and adjoining seas. This is logistically we are at fault. I will try to push the button.
You should click here.
Yes, this is the front page of this document. We have a copy of that. And the document says some very interesting things. Take a look. How much the new gas corridor from Yamal to the Baltic Sea is going to cost? Right now, Gazprom says, okay, we have built a new gas corridor from Yamal to the Baltic Sea at the cost of about $31 billion. In fact, this is the assessment, this is the copy of the document which says that, in fact, well, sorry, this is, I am trying to get it back. This is the real cost of this infrastructure, not yet reaching the Baltic Sea, but going to the city of Torzhok is, according to different scenarios, is estimated to cost between $79 to $93 billion. And Gazprom never publishes the exact figures, how much it has spent on the pipeline. We just know that it was absolutely unnecessary. There is a perfectly safe and workable gas network. Gazprom could have built a very short link from the new field on the Yamal Peninsula to the city of Hamburg, and then connected to the existing network of pipelines. It would be cheap, but Gazprom always selects the most expensive solution because the contractors must get their share of money. And so this is, I think this is exactly what Gazprom spent on that. Well, is it a commercial? We hear from Gazprom that it is an absolutely commercial program of building Nord Stream and South Stream. We see that according to the calculations of Gazprom in the same program, Gazprom is going to lose about $6.50 on each 1,000 cubic meters that it is going to sell through that new gas corridor for a big duration, for a great period, up to 2035. So it is not exactly a commercial project. In fact, it is a project that is well, political, it is punishing Ukraine. And then second, it is a project to transfer the money from the state budget into the pockets of those cronies of the Russian president. Well, basically, I think I will be... Well, there is a very big question. Can Europe do something with Gazprom? Of course, right to this moment, between, I think, 2007 and this moment, Gazprom has complied with every demand that the European regulators made on the company. It decreased the number of intermediaries. It abandoned some monopolistic clauses in its contracts. And when there was an investigation into the monopoly practices of Gazprom launched in 2012, right now the regulators of Europe said we have no other fault, we found no other fault with Gazprom because he obeys. And Gazprom is going to comply with the regulation of the European Commission. If the European Commission insists on independent operator of all those streams and all the pipelines that go into Europe and insists on third-party access, I think it would mean either termination of unnecessary new pipelines such as Nord Stream 2, or it would result in a reform of the Russian gas industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mikhail. And we have about 10 minutes for questions. I'm going to go around with microphone if people want to introduce themselves and state their affiliation first, please. Are there any questions? Thank you. If there are no questions right now, I actually have two quick questions for each speaker. So, first question to Mikhail Karcherkin. You mentioned this optimization plan, which is quite a scandalous piece of news, and we obviously, you have discovered this a while ago, and it's officially stated on Gazprom's website, but why do you think it's not so, people don't know about this in the West and not discussing this?
Is it working? No. Is it?
Just try this one.
Yes, it does. It's not, on one hand, Gazprom was not hiding the optimization program. It published quite a lot of details about that. And recently, the corporate magazine of Gazprom reported the progress of the closed 3 compressor shops that provide pressure to ship gas to Europe. And on the other hand, it's not within interest of the whole project to mention the liquidation of pipelines, because the keywords of rationale of the Nord Stream 2 are Europe needs more gas, Nord Stream 2 supports Green Deal, Nord Stream 2 will replace coal for gas. But in the context of optimization program, it's not true. It's not about any additional gas. It's just the same volume, which is not affecting the European market in any way.
Okay. And I have a question from Mikhail Karcherkin. So you mentioned that Nord Stream, you say, is logistically a quick way to Germany, and Germany then can deliver gas to Italy, Eastern Europe. But there are studies that say that if Ukraine is completely excluded from transit, then actually Germany right now doesn't have enough capacity to send all this gas. Apparently there is a shortage of 100 BCM per year of pipelines to Eastern Europe, to other places. So is really Germany a viable route if Ukraine is excluded? Okay.
I don't know if it works or not.
Sorry, please.
I think, yes, the capacity of Germany is not sufficient to satisfy all the needs of especially Eastern Europe and maybe some parts of Southern Europe. There is another problem, the problem of flexibility, because we do not have an even distribution of gas demand. It fluctuates daily, seasonally. And to do that, those streams are not efficient. They deliver gas with the same pressure at the same period of time. It is flat, absolutely. But you need to supply like that. And to do that, you need Ukraine with its underground storage of gas, which has great experience of dealing with the increases and decreases of seasonal demand and extraordinary demand in some cases. So Ukraine is a sine qua non transit country, which is not only a transit country, but a safety cushion for the security of gas supply in Europe.
There's just a small addition. If you measure the pipeline route from the Yamal Peninsula, from the Babalenko gas field to the German border, the Yamal Europe is the shortest one. It's shorter than the North Sea.
Well, and I would like to add something to the first question. Why people are not aware of the negative features of the negative features of the pipeline? Well, take a look at the parties who are beneficiaries of the project. Well, first, it is in the political sense, it is the Russian president who has an overwhelming impression of the political value of such projects. Then there are those guys who are his cronies, who are building the unnecessary pipelines. They make great profit out of that project. Then there are very respectable European and international companies who are partners of Gazprom in the Baltic Sea, who are financing half of the project out of their pocket. And it's a very profitable deal for them, because they signed a financial agreement with Gazprom, just as the previous consortium signed a financial agreement with Gazprom on the Nord Stream 1. They are entitled to get full transit for Russian gas via this pipeline, regardless of actual volume of gas which is being transported. They don't care if there is gas in the pipe or no. They get for the capacity of the pipeline, but not for physical amount of gas. That's very profitable for them. Then Germany, free of charge, is becoming a new hub of distributing Russian gas. Well, every party that I have mentioned, yes, there is another group of people, because the transit fees for the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, 50% of those transit fees go to a subsidiary of Gazprom, which is registered in Switzerland, and no one knows what happens to the money that is accumulated on bank accounts of that branch of Gazprom after they receive that. So we see there are plenty of interested, materially interested parties there. And when we are trying to attract attention of people in Eastern Europe and Western Europe to the negative features of these projects, well, we are not interested parties. You know, we are fighting for the case with our political and emotional, ethical point of view, and we are opposing people who are materially interested. This is a very cynical problem, I would say.
Great. There's one question from...
We actually have my name is Olga Dulkova, and I represent Ukraine here. I find myself very in this kind of an unusual position when I hear two wonderful experts from Russia speaking on behalf of Ukraine, and obviously speaking truth, and I agree with many of your points. I thank you for many of your points, and I will second them in my own speech. However, I'd like to clarify one issue. In your previous slide, you said, Mr. Krutin, that The only way, at least I understood it this way, to kind of discipline Gazprom is to use the norms of third energy package and insist on third-party access, etc., in Russia. Well, I'm not against it, but knowing how it's done in Russia, don't you think it's a bit naive? Don't you think it will end up in more former politicians from, let's say, few of the European countries coming on board and creating such an independent transmission operator, or companies, bidding for access but not really, don't you think this is a very naive approach to fight this project? However, I am in full support of the efforts of European Commission to kind of discipline the way the gas to be traded later on with Nord Stream.
Yes, I understand this point of view. Yes. This is exactly so. I was under the impression, until yesterday, I was under the impression that there were very interesting reform breeding in Gazprom and in the Russian gas sector. Because Gazprom is right now under 4 kinds of pressure. Well, first, it is the pressure from the European regulators on the third-party access and independent operator of the pipelines. Then there is a very strong pressure from Gazprom itself, which is now in the red, because the prices of gas in Europe are getting smaller and smaller. They are, well, especially with the decarbonization programs of the European countries, and Gazprom is going to suffer financially. It spends quite a lot of money on those mega projects, and has had to increase its investment program this year three times, considering to the original assessment. So Gazprom just cannot bear this financial burden at all. Then the third kind of pressure is from the friends of Mr. Putin. They believe that the program of building unnecessary huge pipelines is over. They have to do something else. They want Gazprom to be dismantled, to sell their contract companies to Gazprom at 3 times or 4 times the price that they had obtained those companies, and then use that money on privatizing Gazprom's subsidiaries after the Gazprom is unbundled, dismantled, dismembered, whatever you call them. And then the third kind of pressure is the general attitude of the Russian leadership, which is preparing for switching from piped strategy for gas to LNG. And so Gazprom, I expected that Gazprom might be, in the final run, fall victim to those 4 kinds of pressure. But just yesterday I heard there was a plan to create a new state-controlled company for LNG and for Arctic. So forget about developing LNG in the Arctic. If they accomplish that plan, it would be an absolutely corrupt company with huge budgets, and Gazprom couldn't do anything in the Arctic. So it will be another Gazprom, but transferred into Arctic. So let us see. The pressure is there. What happens after that? I described a very interesting scenario, but whether it materializes, it's open to discuss. The panel is still out.
And with that, we will run out of time for the introductory session. Please give a round of applause to our speakers. And, we're going to have a 5-minute coffee break. politics by other means. And I give the floor to moderator Roland Freudenstein, a good friend of Free Russia Foundation and policy director at the Wilfred Martins Center for European Studies. Please.
Well, Ilya, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Ilya and Natalia are long-standing friends. And thanks for entrusting a German with the moderation of a panel on Nord Stream 2. This can only be explained by my usually critical attitude to Nord Stream 2. But staying with the issue of Germany, I just may add a few words on the title of this session, which is Nord Stream 2 as Kremlin's politics by other means, which I think is an intentional quote or allusion to another famous German, Karl Philipp Gottfried von Clausewitz, with his famous sentence, war is the continuation of politics by other means. And I might as well stick with this for 1 second, just by saying that in his famous reflection on war, titled On War, vom Kriege, he actually made the point that war has 3 components. It's got violent hatred, it's got an element of chance, and it's got an element of rational reflection, submission of the enemy. Well, how about looking at Nord Stream 2 through that prism, this kind of trinity, as Clausewitz called it? Well, with this, I will just introduce my fellow panelists here. We have 5 of them, plus we will have 2 speakers, members of the European Parliament, who are going to join us at 1 p.m. more or less, as I understand. So at that time we'll interrupt the debate and give a couple of minutes each for Andrius Kubilius from Lithuania and Anna Fotyga from Poland. But now let me return to the panel. We have Alan Weige over here, who is a senior associate fellow of the Institute for Statecraft in London. We've got Alice Stolmeyer, who runs a new and very dynamic NGO in Brussels called Defending Democracy. We have Monica Reiter, who, despite her accent, is actually Czech, a Czech national working for the East Stratcom team of the External Action Service of the European Union, so dealing with Russian disinfo. And we have, last but by no means least, Olga Bielkova, a member of parliament from Ukraine, who's going to cover the Ukrainian angle. And then finally we have Jakub Janda, who is the director of European Values, an extremely active and dynamic think tank in Prague, also very well networked in all the Kremlin watchers worldwide. So I think this is about the best panel we could have. We agreed beforehand to have 5 minutes each, because with 5 panelists and less than an hour time for a debate, we need to be very economical with our time. So, according to the schedule, we'll start with Alice, and we have pre-arranged questions. And Alice, my question to you would be, you have started dealing with the issue of energy security very early on, already long before the Crimea and Ukraine attacks by Russia. What is your experience from the digital trenches of the debate on energy security in Europe? Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Roland. That's right. Before founding Defending Democracy, I used to work as a digital campaigner on European energy and climate policies. I started doing that in September 2012. And I was mostly on Twitter. Twitter is the platform for political debate in the Brussels bubble. In those early days of Twitter, there was still relatively few people on Twitter. The debate was civilized, it was about content and about facts. I quickly became a top influencer on energy and climate policies. And this is not to brag, but just to important the context, and that I was not hiding behind anonymity as you see so often these days. Being the Netherlands, a gas country that climate back in September 2012, but being a keen observer of the larger context, I had no choice but notice Russia's role, and not just in European energy matters, but also geopolitically. So within a few months, I was calling out Gazprom, and later also the Russian trolls that had started to appear around 2014. Perhaps no coincidence that it was in the same year of Crimea and MH17, but that's a side note. So this weekend I looked over my thousands of tweets, doing some searches, and a recurring theme was Russia as a threat, be it physical, geopolitical, regarding energy security or democracy. Russia was and remains a looming malign presence. So just some random examples. Detaining Greenpeace activists, the illegal annexation of Crimea, after which energy security became a big issue. The Young Commission in the summer of 2014, when they started talking about the European Energy Union. Key was energy security. Then a very sad event, July 2014. Russia shot flight MH17 and murdered almost 300 innocent people. 200 of them were my compatriots. I'm from the Netherlands, as I said. So I knew, again, that this was all related to energy security and using gas as a weapon. So often there would be little news like Russia wants to bypass Ukraine as a gas transit. I even made a poster at the time. Keep calm and create the European Energy Union. I saw later that Vice President Shevchevich had even copied the poster and put it on his office door. Scrolling down. So when Nord Stream 2 was announced, for me it was really, it was just one more event in this whole series of little or bigger threats. So as Nord Stream 2 doesn't make any business sense, my first thought when they announced it was, this is another one of Putin's political energy games, part of the Kremlin's overall strategy, bullying Ukraine and dividing the European Union. And I still think it is. So the first reaction of the European Commission at the time was, we don't need more Russian gas. I can name more examples, but Russia kept threatening to cut the gas valves and so on. So, some first reactions from the EU and NATO were similar, like this is not a commercial project, because I've never seen a project so heavily politically debated, said Shevchevich. Former NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen, it's a Russian political project, a danger to European security, and a reversal of the EU's good work on energy security. I see I have only 1 minute left. Then I'll skip some things. Well, let's go back to Twitter then, because interestingly, the spokesperson of Nord Stream 2 repeatedly replied to my tweets, which was kind of funny because I never replied to him. Because for me, frankly, it felt like he was just another troll. So I also had some trolls, a few random examples. Dutch tweeting pro-Brexit troll, repeating Kremlin talking points and making a false equivalence. A Russian tweeting Eurosceptic trolls, again, Kremlin talking points, false equivalence. Calling me names, again, reminder, this was when Twitter used to be still relatively civilized. So I'll quickly go through my conclusions. All of the above, plus ever more election interference, inspired me to found Defending Democracy in 2017. What I learned since then: energy is just one of the many weapons in the Kremlin's self-professed hybrid war against the West. And perhaps good to repeat here, it's what Lenin said is still true today. These Western capitalists are so greedy that they are prepared to sell us the very rope by which we are going to hang them.
Thank you very much. Okay, thanks Alice, for this introduction into early narratives, Kremlin narratives about Nord Stream 2 and how to respond to them. Before we continue, I'd like to welcome very warmly Anna Fotyga and Andrius Kubilius, members of the European Parliament. I understand your contribution will come in about in 10 minutes, is that okay? Because I want to continue a little bit with the panel here, and if you can stay for another hour, as I understood, then that will be just right. Okay, so Monica, over to you with some of the more recent Kremlin narratives, including some fake info on Nord Stream 2.
Sure, thank you so much. So I work for the East Stratcom Task Force at the European External Action Service in Brussels. And as some of you may know, we run the website eu-disinfo.eu, which, a little promo here, has been recently revamped with lots of new features for researchers. So if you are interested in the Kremlin's disinformation efforts in Europe and beyond, then I recommend checking it out. Also, just a disclaimer, because I'm here speaking as a representative of the European External Action Service, I have to be neutral, so please don't ask me any questions about the merits of the pipeline. I am not here to speak about that, merely about the disinformation narratives that we have seen from the Kremlin in recent years about the pipeline. So a consistent feature of the Kremlin's disinformation campaign, whether that's targeting European or national elections, whether it is attacking the Ukrainian state, Ukrainian statehood, Ukraine is public enemy number one for Russia, or indeed whether it's about Nord Stream 2. This disinformation strategy is premised consistently on dividing the West and sowing discord amongst allies. For Russia, leveling the playing field by attempting to bring others down is one of the few tools available to a regime that is weak in terms of standard indicators. So this disinfo strategy has also been the playbook around the Nord Stream 2 project. And really we can say, based on our observations, that the thrust of these efforts fall into four categories. The first and most common of those, by a significant margin, is this idea of US imperialism in Europe. This idea that the US is basically the hand that is pushing the sentiments and politics of European states in cases where there is opposition to the pipeline. And of course, you know, the Kremlin has a habit of accusing others of that for which it is itself responsible. And this is something that we have absolutely seen with the narratives around the pipeline. So generally, there are suggestions that EU and individual member states are beholden to American or US special interests and its geopolitical agenda, and thus are incapable of acting in their own self-interest. As a result, any opposition to Nord Stream 2 is twisted as being not organic, but rather manufactured and enforced by the US, which is using the stick approach of the carrot and stick. This approach fits neatly into this well-worn narrative of lost sovereignty that the Kremlin likes to use on many various topics. It applies it across the board. That member states lack sovereignty and independence to make their own decisions, to pursue their own interests, either due to the leadership from Brussels or in some cases due to the US. Of course, the goal of this strategy, quite obviously, is to undermine the transatlantic relationship and to delegitimize the membership of member states, also in eyes of the publics of these states. And so a couple of examples from our database, which is publicly available on the website that I mentioned, claims such as the Eastern European countries will do anything to support their overseas masters over Nord Stream 2 just for a few cents. US is against Nord Stream 2 because it wants to destroy Europe. That the US would actually like to resell Russian gas to Europe. That Germany has limited sovereignty. So again, these are very standard examples, and a cursory search of headlines on Sputnik or Russia Today will provide plenty of further examples. So that's one. I'll move a little bit quicker. Yeah. So the second tactic is fear-mongering, which is also very common, and pushing apocalyptic scenarios meant to undermine a sense of opposition, let's say, in member states, even the
whole region. Now, Nord Stream 2 is a matter extremely serious for Ukraine, and this argument we take also very seriously into account. During all this time that I remember, we are now much more aware of Russian disinformation, propaganda, destabilization, tools of information war waged open West. But at that time, Nord Stream project was always accompanied. It has been accompanied with heavy propaganda from both Kremlin and inside Europe also. Parties engaged in the project were very outspoken all this time about benefits and trying to actually to reverse argumentation. While Nord Stream 2 seriously undermines energy security of whole region, including a country that is a victim of Russian aggression, seriously undermining possibilities to have a stable development during this time of already association with the EU. We have still debates and very wise argumentation taken on board, speaking about links to transatlantic policies. Yes, Central and Eastern Europe is probably much more transatlantic than the rest of Europe, regardless to administration within the United States. We see a necessity to maintain this link, and I would like to remind you that Nord Stream projects, both Nord Stream 1 but also now Nord Stream 2, are not business projects. It is publicly acknowledged that though this project is a matter of security, and during the NATO summit in Riga and then following the NATO summit in Bucharest, we were able to put passages concerning energy security and having in mind exactly many of us Nord Stream projects that undermine security of Europe. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And we now move on to Andrius Kubilius, former Prime Minister of Lithuania, with his keynote address to the conference.
Well, Roland, thanks a lot. I don't know if my statement can be considered like a keynote. It will be very short, and especially when I'm sitting in such a company like yourself, Roland, and Alan Riley, we know very well, Nana Fotiga, and all of others. I don't see what is needed to be repeated when we're talking about Nord Stream 2. So for us, everything is very clear. And especially I had some kind of experience being Prime Minister to fight for Estonian energy independence with assistance of Alan Riley. His good advice. We were totally dependent on gas supplies. We managed to win that battle with assistance of EU and so on and so on. But at that time it was very clear, we saw what was said in Kremlin. Even in official documents, I don't remember exactly that document, it was military strategy, where it was said that energy independence of Baltic states is a threat to Russian national security, which they can fight with using all means. So that's how in Kremlin, unfortunately for the time being, they consider energy policy. Energy supplies, those are instruments of geopolitical influence, and there is nothing to say, trying to add. I would add only that from our own perspective, there is one project, Nord Stream 2, which we're talking about. Kremlin is investing around $10 billion US. There is another project, Astravets nuclear power plant, on the border with Belarus, 30 kilometers from Vilnius, where Kremlin is investing also $10 billion US. So for us, it's also threat, direct threat to our security. Well, how to stop Nord Stream 2, I don't know. There are legal experts, EU experts who can tell. We know what will be the consequences of Nord Stream 2. First of all, it will be the consequence, very bad consequence of geopolitical security of Ukraine. We don't know what we can forecast, what steps of new military aggression can be, initiated by Kremlin. If they will not be, if they will see no danger to damage, transit to Europe of their gas supply, so that can be a very, very big threat. I would try to point at that, in that case, what Angela Merkel has said. A year ago or 2 years ago, she said, well, Nord Stream 2 will not be operational if there will be no guarantees of transit, as she said, guarantees of transit through Ukraine. Who can give such guarantees? Should we trust Mr. Putin in his guarantees? I would not trust very much. I would trust much more in Angela Merkel guarantees, but not on transit, but on geopolitical security of Ukraine. From our own experience, we know how we got that, security through our integration into the EU and NATO. That is the only guarantee which the West can give to Ukraine in such a situation. And the last point. From my point of view, Nord Stream 2 is a consequence of a fact of a situation that EU and the whole West still do not have clear long-term strategy towards Russia. That is the major problem. And not only how to defend ourselves, our region, for example, Baltic states using NATO capabilities, but here's no strategy how West can assist Russia You know, in order for Russia to transform itself into more democratic and European type country, dialogue with Putin is not a strategy. Nord Stream 2, again, is not a strategy that can help, you know, Russia to overcome all the problems which they are facing. Maybe I am naive, but I trust that Russia, sometime, it will take a long time, it will not happen with Putin, that sometime Russia will come back to democratic and European type development. We need to look what kind of strategy we can have. We need to discuss some kind of such strategy, and that is what I am looking for possibilities how to have some kind of forums or specific platforms inside of European Parliament, and to be welcome to come and to discuss some of those issues.
Thank you very, very much for these two enlightening remarks. I would also use this opportunity to welcome two other members of the European Parliament, right across from me, Marketa Gregorova, and we have here on the right-hand side, Mr. Georgios Kyrtsos. Welcome, thank you for coming. We would very much appreciate if you took part in the debate later on after the initial remarks, if you can manage to stay so long. Anyway, we will now continue with the panel. We have 3 more contributions, and then we will have question and answer and debate. So I would like now to turn to Alan Riley from the Institute for Statecraft. In direct response to what we heard from the MEPs and also what Monica said about the Kremlin narratives. So what are the appropriate Western responses to those?
I'm going to keep this very short. I'm going to keep this very short because I recognise that we have a time pressure here. So I would say essentially there are 4, I think, major challenges. Price, dependency, division, and leverage. And price is this. If you have Nord Stream 2, whilst it is true that it may result in lower prices in Germany, there is what you would call a waterbed effect, which will result in higher gas prices in Central and Eastern Europe. It's partly through transit costs and partly through the increasing Gazprom market dominance. So price is a significant consequence of Nord Stream 2 for many, many European countries. The second is dependency. And one of the ironies of Nord Stream 2 is that the country which suffers most from dependency as a result of Nord Stream 2 within the European Union is Germany. Because the consequence of Nord Stream 2 is that 70% of Russian exports to Europe end up coming down a narrow 2-kilometre channel with 4 pipelines, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, all coming along the same narrow channel. And Germany goes from a situation, and indeed the whole of Europe, goes from a situation of having Nord Stream 1, Yamal, and the Brotherhood pipeline, to just having Yamal and Nord Stream 1 and 2 together. So essentially you are massively reducing route diversity. And in not merely are you reducing route diversity, what you're actually doing is putting a huge amount of that supply in this very narrow and vulnerable channel. And even without talking about the prospect of any Russian action on the pipeline, mere accident along the very busy shipping channel or terrorist action could seriously threaten supply. And the country which directly and immediately will be impacted more than any other is in fact Germany. It has obviously a knock-on effect on other European states, but Germany is the principal and immediate country which suffers from that increasing supply route, reduction to just 2 routes. The third is division. The European Union, since it was created with the EEC in 1957, has promoted the creation of an integrated European market. Now, for the first time in the history of the European Union, what Nord Stream 2 does is that it reverses market integration. We've been increasingly, ever since the Central and Eastern European states, the Baltic states joined in 2004 and 2007, we have an increasingly integrated markets with all of the states of Central and Eastern Europe. including in the gas market. What Nord Stream 2 does is it divides the European single market in gas. Because what you're essentially doing with the gas coming through to Greifswald and then going eastward on the Oidal pipeline is you're flooding the west to east interconnectors with Gazprom-controlled gas. And as a consequence of which, you are making it very difficult for any other gas to compete with that gas. So essentially, you're leaving that market in a much more stronger, a much more divided position, with only the availability of gas control by Gazprom largely in that market. And so you have in the West a liberalized market with lots of different sources of supply and different routes. And in the East, you're basically relying substantially on Gazprom. So you're dividing the market. But finally, from all of this, you have leverage. And the leverage is that the effect of giving Gazprom that amount of market power transmutes not just into higher prices, but a whole range of political leverage, and largely because you cannot then turn to anybody else for any gas. And that is where we are with this, in price, dependency, division, and leverage. And one of the questions that we have to ask is how can we have got into a situation where Nord Stream 2 has been supported by any member states? And the second question that follows from that is, if we have got this, how do we challenge it and how do we effectively respond? And those are questions we can ask in the panel. I'll stop there.
Mike. Thanks, Helen. Thanks also for sticking to the time limit. We have another member of the European Parliament among us, Herman Dach from Spain. Welcome. It's a great honor to have so many MEPs around the table, but that testifies to the importance of the topic. So I would now like to hand the floor to Yanda. And, you know, besides narratives, what are the other instruments and means that Russia uses to actually promote its strategy around Nord Stream 2?
Right. So thank you for the Free Russia Foundation for having me here again. I'm very happy to be your friend on this topic. And just very specifically, I will skip the energy discussion and the disinformation discussion, as other colleagues have already discussed that. But I think what we shouldn't forget is the overall strategy of the Russian government, which if you just exclude the technical details of this case, the strategic objective of Vladimir Putin and his people is actually to achieve what we call strategic submission of European countries, which doesn't mean that European countries give up and become part of Russia or something like that. It means that European countries actually give up on what Russia considers to be the buffering zone, which means Ukraine, Georgia, many other countries in between, probably the Baltic states as well, and probably some countries in Central Europe as well. So that is what the Russian Federation wants, not only in military terms, but in the terms of influence and geopolitical influence there. So how can Russia achieve that using tools like Nord Stream 2? Actually, if you look through the European map, the map is actually very blurry if you are looking from Moscow. So what you need to do, you want to find the strongest piece of Europe in this case, which is Berlin or which is Germany and German politics, and a couple of countries around that obviously. But Germany is the main target for Russian influence operations using Nord Stream 2 as a tool. So how can you do that? We call that tool basically creating economic interdependence, or at least a perception of that, which it isn't only Russia using it today. We see China using a very similar tool in different sectors. So how does it look like, if I put it very generally without going into the details? First, if you are Russia and China, you try to find what we call a strategic influencer in a targeted country, in Prague, Berlin, Brussels, Paris. You try to find strategic companies, usually private businesses, which actually already have political influence in their capitals, which is natural, and that's how business works. So you try to find them, and if you find those who are willing to, I would say, sacrifice, or who are willing to actually go for their business further than some of our principles, it's easy to start in this way. So you find a private company in European capitals. You try to lure them into doing strategic business with Russian proxies or Russian entities. It might be Gazprom, it might be Rosneft, it might be Lukoil, it might be others, it might be Chinese companies. So you lure those European companies in your country or to start a business. After a couple of years, after those European private companies actually benefit from that engagement and actually see much bigger earnings in the future, what will happen is that those companies will slowly become proxies of Russian foreign policy interests. So then if you look through Berlin, Prague, Paris, for example, you'll find companies which are domestic, which are Czech, German, French or Dutch, but which are essentially lobbying on behalf of the Russian Federation. Because it is in their economic private interest to do so, because they are benefiting from those deals. On Nord Stream 2, but we have seen many other smaller things happening in Europe as well. And then, what those companies can do is that they can actually hire current or former political figures. We all know Mr. Schroeder from Germany, but there are dozens of other figures like Mr. Schroeder, not only in Germany, also in my own country, in the Czech Republic, in other countries, in Austria, Netherlands, in Austria, many other countries in Europe. And those people became the levers, the proxies of Russian foreign policy interests. And at the end, if you look over this scheme, in 3, 4, 5 years, you actually have a network, or I would say an influence infrastructure, which actually naturally lobbies on behalf of Russian foreign policy interests. And those are not only Russian intelligence agencies, and those are domestic companies. And this is essentially how Nord Stream 2 happened, because I think what is interesting for all of us to see, if you would look back over the last 5 years, how Russian foreign policy interests have been, let's say, successful in co-opting many people in, I would say, mainly German political establishment, but also in many other countries. And I will finish up with just saying an example of my own country, Czech Republic. So the Czech government has a so-called neutral position on Nord Stream 2. What it practically means that the Czech government has signed in recent years a couple of critical letters on Nord Stream 2, at least. But the government doesn't, Czech government doesn't support the critical governments like Poland, like the Baltic states, like many others. And there is one single reason for that. One specific Czech company is economically benefiting or will be benefiting from Nord Stream 2, and the government in Prague actually decides, well, maybe the private interest of that company and their economic benefits is much more important than a geopolitical principle where we should stand with our allies from Central Eastern Europe. So I'm just finishing up not to be critical only about Germany, although my own government, and because then when you have governments which are basically willing to sacrifice the geopolitical interest of themselves and their allies and their close friends like Ukraine, then things like Nord Stream 2 happen. And to finish up, I think Nord Stream 2 is, I'm afraid, only the beginning. What is more scary for me isn't only the numbers and let's say the money flowing towards Russia because of Nord Stream 2, but also what it shows, the level of acceptance of the strategic submission towards Russia. Because it comes now with President Macron's initiatives of basically appeasing Russia, and something what I keep hearing a lot in many corridors saying, if we do more business with Russia, it will become less aggressive, which is not true. And any history, recent years, everything shows this is not true. But there are so many people in European capitals who believe that and who are willing to believe that. So I'm afraid that's where we are losing the battle.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you for this passionate statement, Jakub. Now we're moving to Olga Milkova from Ukraine, and Ukraine has been mentioned by every speaker up to now. So, what is the perspective from Ukraine?
Thank you so much. It's very easy for me to comment right now because all the necessary points were made by my colleagues. I'd like to thank you, organizers, and in particular Free Russian Foundation for organizing it here in Brussels. And I have a very special reason to be grateful. I've been doing talks on Nord Stream 2 for the last 7 years, maybe 5 years. I was deputy head of the Energy Committee in my parliament. Let me tell you, with the re-election in Ukraine, with a new president, the rhetoric towards Nord Stream 2 remains the same in place. There is not one politician in Ukraine who will come here here and will tell, our peers from European parliaments that we have changed our mind, and this is great news. Ukraine stays very true to this notion of saying Nord Stream 2 is dangerous not only to Ukraine, but to the whole Europe. And we know it firsthand because it's a military threat for us, not economical, not just, philosophical security threat. It is military threat to us. But second point I want to make is that there is this notion that everybody in Russia and everybody in Germany loves Nord Stream 2 project, which is of course not true, because there are people who have their own reasons to have their own concerns about democracy in Russia, corruption. What was shown today is a real cost for Russia, not for anybody in Europe, not for Ukraine, but it's devastating. I mean, I praise for your bravery that you come on stage and you explain how corruption is ruining your country. It is dangerous for Europe in many terms, and we heard explanation from technical point of view of how Central and Eastern Europe will be without gas should there will be disruption to Ukrainian transit system. And of course there are many talks about, oh yes, of course Ukraine is defending its own interest. Yes, it is my job to come to such forums and explain. Not only Ukraine will lose a substantial part of our budget, it's about $3 billion as of now, but we will have disruption to the whole economy and military security kind of strategy in the country, because so far what we saw that Russian aggression were always stopped at the point of border where transmission system was. And for me, usually it takes about 3 to 4 talks to my peers from European parliaments, be it national parliaments or here in Brussels or in Strasbourg. Usually those who are neutral, they say, well, this is too technical, this is not about my country, this is not about my constituency, I don't see direct implication. Here is my news to you. Of course it will be touching your constituency, especially if you live in Czech Republic, in Poland, in Baltics, because the whole point of bringing all the gas to Germany will ruin the economic potential of each and every country, because let me tell you, right now the only sector of economy which will have potential increase of need, of supply of gas is industry. So of course I understand Germany advocating for all the gas coming to Germany, because then they will have substantial advantage over the rest of Europe. But let's not forget, gas for many countries is also issue of supplying heat to our people in all those countries. But since I said that everything was explained, I don't think I need to preach converted here in this room. Everybody understands it's wrong. I felt I will inform you what Ukraine currently is doing to protect our position and to get ready for future with potential Nord Stream 2. So first of all, as of now, we have a real gas market. Up to 500 companies, including foreign companies, including Western companies, are being traders in Ukraine. They import gas from Europe to Ukraine. They trade the way they want. There is no political pressure, unlike in Russia. And we are very proud of this reform. We created a very special conditions for using of Ukrainian storages in our gas system to once again say Ukraine is not a problem for EU gas system. Ukraine is a solution. And not only we have the largest in the world transmission system as of now, not only in Europe but in the world, which has almost like at each and every point of transmission system, we have 3 separate lines. We have capacity of 145 BCM of gas. As of today, about 60 BCM of gas is not being used. It's more than 2 lines of Nord Stream 2. So once again, I have no understanding why still some people defend this project. We have the highest amount of storage in our storage, the highest amount of volume of natural gas right now, because getting ready for what may come after the 1st of January 2020. As you know, we don't have a contract right now. The EU is helping us to negotiate this contract, but who knows what will happen. And I strongly recommend Poland, Lithuania and others to strengthen the effort to have storage capacity. So all of us will have leverage in these negotiations. We are passing the very important laws on unbundling. Russia is saying that we don't want to comply, not true. We are ready to comply with all the rules, and all the obligations taken will be delivered. We have our first contract for LNG via Polish terminal. We are ready on Ukrainian side. We encourage our Polish colleagues to consolidate effort and to prepare infrastructure so the delivery could happen as of 2020. That was my last point of my agenda. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Olga. We have 15 minutes left for the debate. Thank you. 15 minutes left for a Q&A. That's enough for probably just one round, depending on how many of you want to speak. Please, sir, would you briefly introduce yourself and then make either a brief point or ask a question?
Yes, I'll do my best. It's a question. Scott Martin, Global Rise Compliance, team of international lawyers working in Kiev and The Hague. I want to avail myself of the opportunity with so many parliamentarians in the room and deal with the question of something that's come up repeatedly throughout this event, authoritarian enablers. And I think we have looked at how we got here with the Nord Stream deal. And I don't want to attribute a percentage to it, but I do want to ask, how much is this? Because the Rolodex, so to speak, and the contact list of former senior leaders have worked on behalf of foreign non-democratic leadership to promote these deals behind the scenes. Now, there's been a movement, there's discussions about taking this to ask for a declaration, ask for something so that there will be a commitment to leaders, former leaders, not taking this position and working for these types of groups. Is this something that either the European Parliament or my friend in the Verkhovna Rada can legislate, and if so, how?
Very pertinent question. Who else would like to take the floor? Well, then we ask maybe our members of the European Parliament to ask this question. What are you doing to disable the enablers of authoritarianism? Yes, Madam Minister, you need a mic. Yeah.
Well, we use, first of all, we use possibilities that are given by the European Parliament to make things public. During previous 8th legislature, the ECR group and myself, we organized together with our Danish colleagues presentation of a book written by Danish journalists exposing corruption and links of public figures to Nord Stream project. Secondly, there are many events accompanying Stratcom and presentation of propaganda that is accompanying this. It was presentation of important report that was published by one of the most renowned British institution think tanks, and exposing the so-called Surkov leaks. In terms of legislation, there is not directly linked to Nord Stream 2, but actually to questionable links, in particular with authoritarian regimes, Kremlin as well. I mean Magnitsky campaigns Of course, there are some countries and politicians who do not like to even mention the name of Sergei Magnitsky, but there are many MEPs within European Parliament who strongly support this cause.
Thank you very much. I've got three more MEPs who would like to answer to this or raise points of their own. And we start with Herman Terch, right here. Microphone's coming. No, behind you.
So thank you, Herman Terch from Spain, from the group ECR as well. Well, I was wondering, I asked Mr. Kutichin before outside, I mean, we wonder why this lack of action, because it's so obvious, the danger of the prospect of this axis, which you can't go Berlin, Moscow in this way without a major contestation of whole of Europe that should be obviously there, and there should be some mobilizations against this only the historical graphic view of this threat that it is. So that's really amazing that we have this lack of reaction, and we can see some of the reasons of it are quite obvious. It's the dependency of many in the West from these prospects with Russia, but also the dependence from Germany. I mean, if there is something worrying in the development in Western Europe in the last times, I would say it's the lack of critic in Germany itself. I mean, the homogeneity of the German press and of the German opinion, how this, I would almost say, Gleichschaltung that we had. Gleichschaltung it's a Gleichschaltung in the sense we have no major opposition to the way mainstream politics are done in Germany. I know it's a tough word. I know it's a tough word, and that Germans don't like to hear this word because it's a very strong one. But it's really worrying that you see how difficult to see some opposition words, and if someone comes out and says something in Germany, you see immediately how a common reaction against these individuals or these opinions arise. And I think it's really dangerous because it goes over to, as I say, to the Western countries, which are really dependent on Germany in many things, and who don't want to annoy German opinion or don't want to annoy Berlin. And so we have this lack of reaction to this obvious threat of this action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Marketa Grigorova.
Thank you very much. I'm Marketa Grigorova. I'm a new MEP from the Pirates, and I'm also from the Czech Republic. There has been so many interesting remarks, so I don't even know where to begin. I will maybe directly answer your question also, as I'm a new MEP, so I have to say I haven't done anything yet, I'm sorry. But I will definitely try, because from what I've heard, I'm no energetic expert. My main focus is actually security, let's say. It's also connected to the fact that I'm in international trade and foreign affairs committees and security and defense. So when we are discussing also the economical aspect, I'm more inclined to say, oh, who cares about the money? This is really a security topic, you know. And I was very interested to hear from Ms. Richter the examples of the disinformation that has been going, around. Because I think that's also like an answer to what my colleague previously mentioned, like why are no politicians in Germany reacting to that strongly? Well, one point might be the money, because someone might have, there's a lot of companies that has money in it, actually. So there's a lot of lobbying going on, definitely. But also maybe it's because the disinformation works of well, not only Russia, but all the interested parties are so strong that it's dissolving what is the real problem, where is the truth, which is the point of these activities. And yeah, I really think that it's the core issue, and I'm not saying that because it's my core issue, you know, but I really see it as a very important part of the whole discussion. Like, what is the counterpart or partner for some Russia doing in this case in regards to information? What information is it distributing, and is it true? And I think we should combat this or deal with this, not combat, like, I don't know, ban any websites or internets with them. I would hate to see that, but to tell the citizens the truth and tell the citizens what is really going on, and then there might become some kind of a position for which we are apparently calling for.
Thank you very much. And we have Mr. Kiltsos here on the right.
Thank you. I come from Greece, so as you probably understand, I'm not an expert on the subject, but it really interests me. First of all, I believe that we have to help Ukraine because they made a choice, a pro-European choice. So we shouldn't, and they paid a big price in national terms and in economic and financial terms. So we shouldn't create more problems for them. This is my view. Second, our Polish friends are considered Eurosceptics in Brussels. I don't know whether this is wrong or right, but if we do consider them Eurosceptics, we should not provoke them. We should send them a message that the European Union in general is in a position to cover their needs, and they should trust the European Union more. Third, I believe that the European Union is in a state of strategic confusion all over the European Union, because we don't know how to handle Turkey and Erdogan, we don't know what to do about Ukraine, we don't know what to do about Putin, we are confused in Syria, Libya, Iraq, confused about migrants and refugees. So since our transatlantic relation is getting weaker by the time, we have to deal with all these strategic issues that are threatening the future of the European Union. Finally, we are considered as the European Union not a military force, not a political force, but we tend to think of ourselves as a major economic and financial and commercial force. So we use our economic influence in the wrong direction, it seems, which is really worrying as far as Nord Stream 2 is concerned. Finally, we have in the European Union the so-called revolving door system. You are a politician and then you get to an American bank, a Russian conglomerate or whatever. So, but I don't think we should try too much to find out who is corrupt or not. These are major political issues, and we should stick to the political substance. But I admit that there is no watertight system as far as corruption in the European Union is concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. Now, we're already eating into your coffee break here, so let's keep it really, really short and snappy, but I want to give the opportunity to some of the panelists to add a few points. Olga.
Yes, thank you. So the question was more or less, what do? We do exactly what was done in this book. We expose what is being, corrupted. Look at these names who sit on the board of Gazprom. There are no doubts it is corruption. And then, if I go back to my notes, European Parliament tremendously helped us when you brought to light the discussion about Nord Stream 2 in this very forum. And then you ask politicians to vote, because politicians have only one way how to make their position clear, to vote. So 90% of German MEPs, they had to vote in favor of two resolutions which were saying Nord Stream 2 was a wrong project.
So my plea to all the colleagues from European Parliament, keep doing your work, expose this topic as a top priority for your discussion, and then we will see who will vote how, and we will expose their ties, their declarations, their financial statements, who gets paid what, and from which source.
Okay,
and
three.
we post roll call votes on this, yes, we do.
Three things what to do. First, every parliament can actually have an investigative group or a committee looking over Russian influence issues in your own country. I believe that's what Bundestag should have done, and honestly I believe European Parliament can to some extent do a similar job. Because if you look to the US Congress or the UK Parliament, they have done their investigations on Russian influence issues. And look at all the details which were made public because of that. Nobody on the continent has actually done anything like that. So that's one thing parliamentarians should do. Number two, every country has its traitors. You cannot change that. But what you can change is you can expose them so there are not so many of them. And the example I would give is that if Mr. Schroeder was a keynote speaker of the SPD convention several years after he was already working for Russia, there is something wrong. And it's not only about him, there are dozens of other examples. So when a person or former political figure starts to work on behalf of a foreign adversary in power, it needs to be exposed, and his or her peers in the political establishment need to say, this is wrong, you are going to be isolated, you are not going to join us again. I mean, in a societal peer pressure. That's what needs to be happening. It is not happening almost at all in Europe. And number three, if there is a new European Parliament, I believe there should be something like an intergroup on Russian interference issues. It's great that there are MEPs here from the Green Group to ECR, and that's great, but you need to work together in finding things which are related to disinformation, strategic corruption, many other issues. So please do work together on these issues, because otherwise the partisan lines will actually kill anything what makes sense in this parliament.
Monica.
I would just add a very quick point following on what Ms. Gregorova said, and also Jakub, regarding the role of domestic proxies. This is something that is incredibly pernicious in the context of the propaganda and disinfo campaign around Nord Stream 2. The degree of internalization that we have seen by many people domestically about this is incredibly unnerving, and the experiences that I have had in Brussels encountering people who clearly believe the essential Kremlin talking points that have been repeatedly proven false, that are self-evidently false with a cursory Google search, is very disturbing. So I second everything that Jakub said as well about the new challenges.
Right, yeah, let's go down there. Yeah.
Very short, I think it's also time for the new European Commission to, some of them, sit together and make a coherent strategy on Russian threats, including Franz Timmermans, Josep Borrell, Margarita Schinas, Vera Jourova, probably some others, to make a really coherent one, of which Nord Stream 2 is just one part.
Okay, to actually deal with Nord Stream 2, I think there are a number of things which are possible. One, some of it's all being done. Actually, Poland has played a very significant role in this. We've got the Baltic pipeline coming on stream in 2022. We've got greater LNG capacity. This is great. It begins to provide an alternative. It pushes back on Nord Stream 2. Another thing that Europe can do is the Trans-Balkan pipeline, which runs down from Ukraine to Greece. A lot of that can be reverse flow. We should complete that. We can use the Greek LNG terminal in Attica, potentially adding another one in a floating gasification unit. We can then provide alternative sources of supply. In terms of what we can do under European Union law, the Opal case has shown, again, a credit to Poland for bringing the Opal case. We've seen that we can actually impose restrictions on pipelines, Russian-sponsored pipelines, and ensure they're complied with. Another possibility, which I've written about recently, is using the EU foreign investment screening regulation to bring, member states to bring a case against Nord Stream 2 under the new foreign investment screening regulation, and for the European Parliament's Trade Committee to open up a parallel inquiry. This is something that we could look at very seriously. Okay, I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. Yeah, okay,
One comment.
very, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. One comment. I really respect Jakub Janda very much indeed. He's so important person in this, but I would like to comment on one thing of, let's say, intergroup of or special committee on Russian influence. Knowing policies of the EU, of the outcoming High Representative, Vice President, speaking so frequently about double-track approach vis-à-vis Russia. It was this concept was criticized by us, by myself, quite frequently, and I think that the most effective policy now is to make aware all permanent committees of the European Parliament, rather than informal groups, about necessity to speak also about negative aspects of deep cooperation with Russia, engagement in many areas. Otherwise, we have separate negative aspects of cooperation with Russia, and it is somehow alienated. That is why I think that voting by whole parliament and putting this to the agenda of official committees is much more effective. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister. Now, especially these last 10 minutes have proven that even preaching to the converted can have a purpose, because we all get to know new arguments, we get to new angles that we didn't look at so closely before. So let me I can't even summarize the debate, just to give you a couple of takeaways. We've talked about the narratives that Russia is using, we talked about Russia using its business influence, we talked about particular countries, Ukraine, for whom Nord Stream 2 is a loss of security and a loss of income, Ukraine that is reforming its energy sector, the elite capture in several German countries, several European countries, not only in Germany. And, Mr. Thatcher is just leaving the room. Well, there is no such thing as Gleichschaltung in the German debate. Now, Gleichschaltung is a Nazi term, if you remember your history. No, and I think the example given by Olga, that 90% of the German members of the European Parliament actually voted against Nord Stream 2. There's a famous statement by Manfred Weber of 2017 where he gave all the strategic arguments against Nord Stream 2. So, I mean, that needs to be said, and there is no such thing as Germany silencing dissent here. To come back to the title of this session, Nord Stream 2 as the continuation of Kremlin politics by other means, and already made this parallel to Clausewitz. You know, I think the strategic word in this whole debate was strategic submission. That Nord Stream 2, this is not primarily about gas deliveries, this is not even primarily about environmental and technical aspects, although we are going to talk about this in the next session, but this is, for this session, about politics. And it is an instrument of strategic submission, just like for Clausewitz. War as a continuation of politics, both were instruments of strategic submission of the enemy, and this is like completely free of moral values in his case. It's just a factual statement. And I think that is the way we need to look at Nord Stream 2, and we need to continue criticizing it. Thank you very much, and I'll let you go to the coffee break. Thanks to the speakers, to the MEPs, and to everybody else in this room.
There are some drinks and snacks now.
environment and climate and other topics which are not covered in the first session. And I will be the moderator of this session. My name is Alexei Kozlov. I'm from Berlin, and it is kind of German dominance in moderating of this conference, but it was not specially, believe me. And we will have on this session the following speakers: Alexei Lotman, biologist, formerly of the Estonian Green Party; Ilya Zaslavsky, the head of research of the Free Russian Foundation; Dmitry Bereshkov is the director of the Arctic Consult Company, Norway; and Johannes Rohr, Institute for Ecology and Action Anthropology. And if the speakers want to add something to what I said about them, they can free to do it. And I give the floor to Alexei Lotman with his presentation. And please keep in mind that 5 minutes sharp.
Thank you. About environment, it's really quite trivial. The simple issue is that any such huge infrastructure in fossil fuel is locking in the energy system, while we need to go climate neutral by 2050, and in order to that we absolutely must avoid such huge infrastructures for fossil fuel. The Nord Stream 2 environmental impact assessment claims that it is part of climate solution, and this is completely false. It is part of the problem, and a big one. It is partly based on false claim of gas as a transition tool. This claim was true 20 years ago, especially 30 years ago, because indeed burning gas has somewhat lighter carbon footprint than burning coal or even burning oil. But on top of that, of course, with gas you must consider the leakages of methane that is in itself a very important climate, very important greenhouse gas. But furthermore, by now the technologies are there. We don't need this gas as a bridge. It is quite clear that most of the cuts must come from energy saving, and the technologies for saving are there. They are deployed, but insufficiently. They are deployed already based on relatively weak policies that are there. With stronger policies, these technologies for energy savings will be deployed quicker, and the remaining shall be covered by renewables. And again, the technologies are there, they are deployed, but again, the pace of deployment is not sufficient because policies are there, and policies are far too weak. And large projects like Nord Stream 2 are directing needed investments away from the real measures that are energy saving and the renewables. Then, of course, on top of the climate impacts that any such huge infrastructure for fossil fuels will have, there are regional impacts on biodiversity in the Baltic Sea. Even the project's own really very flawed environmental impact assessment admits that there are severe threats to critically endangered ringed seals in the Gulf of Finland. Also, there are severe impacts on coastal protected areas, but I haven't been there, so I can't give you first eyewitness report on that. But I trust Russian environmental NGOs who also say that there have been severe and breaches of Russian own environmental legislation. The chemical impacts on marine environment. The impact assessment repeatedly claims that these are temporary, local and insignificant, but does not provide any proof on this. There is some limited assessment on benzoyl and dioxins and on zinc. There is no assessment whatsoever on DDT, PCBs or mercury. When I asked why, they just say, well, it wasn't included in the terms of reference. And impacts on eutrophication, again, there is no proper assessment of nutrient, mostly phosphorus, release from the sediment, but some increase in German waters is, again, foreseen even in the official document of the assessment, and this is clearly against the Baltic Sea Environmental Action Plan adopted by all the Baltic Sea countries, including Germany and including Russia. So summing up, Nord Stream 2 is contradicting both global and EU climate goals. Nord Stream 2 is not in accord with the EU environmental legislation, and it is violating the Baltic Sea Environmental Action Plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much for time limits, and I give the floor to Ilya Zastovsky, Free Russia Foundation Head of Research.
Thank you very much, Alexei. I'll try to be short, and here I'm representing not only my own viewpoints, but also our partner, Evgeny Chirikova from Activatica, who was in our previous conferences but couldn't make it to Strasbourg. And you might ask, why corruption and environment staying in the same panel? It's not just because we have to be concise and pull things together. Actually, wherever you have a footprint of Gazprom, you have corruption. So I'll start with how corruption has permeated from Gazprom into environmental issues. So Alexei Lokman has just mentioned that fossil fuel is a bad thing, and we need more investment in the infrastructure. And in the infrastructure which is carbon neutral, and we need renewables and so forth. So of course in Europe this debate has been, I see it has been slowly changing from everyone seeing gas as a bridge fuel from coal to renewables, as a sort of acceptable fossil fuel. Now there is no such consensus, and in our previous discussions, in our previous conferences, we had people who showed very good studies, very persuasive studies that methane leaks from all the way from production to transportation, from all gas companies, not just Gazprom. They are bad, and if you count all the carbon climate change impact from the leaks all the way from production to transportation to distribution, it's as bad as coal. But even if you remain a person who believes that natural gas is a bridge fuel, you should know that Gazprom is the worst among its peers. So even compared to these other bad actors, Gazprom is the worst. It's the second biggest contributor of greenhouse gases. Why? Because of flaring. I myself, a former gas guy, I saw some of these gas fields. So imagine a flare twice as much as this ceiling, burning for the whole year. Not every day, but on a consistent basis. And that's what's happening because of Gazprom's monopoly. Gazprom has monopoly for transportation system inside Russia and for export of gas. So it doesn't allow third-party access. It's easier for Russian oil companies and for many gas producers in Russia to just burn and to produce oil. It's a quick grab and run sort of economics. No one wants to invest in these long-term projects in gas because of this lack of access into the transportation system. And that's because of corruption. Mr. Putin has been promising to reduce this problem for 20 years. Every year he's promising and nothing is happening. And satellites show that Russia is burning like a Christmas tree during the night, especially when gas is not needed. But more corruption. So Baltic region was mentioned. So in Kurgansky nature reserve, we had fake hearings, we had change of documentation on natural reserves, not just in Kurgansky reserve, in a way that can impact other nature reserves in Russia, and has already impacted it. Greenpeace Austria published this material. There has been many trespassing of various Russian and international treaties. I won't mention them now due to brevity, but you can find them all in our brochure on page 8 to 11. And now to corruption in other areas. Okay, so I have 1 minute. Forecasts of Gazprom are chosen in a corrupt and misleading way, just to really exaggerate demand in Europe, exaggerate need for Russian gas, to sell it inside Russia for insiders, as our two honorable speakers in the first panel mentioned, but also to give ammo to this lobby for Gazprom inside Europe. And then, in the last and big point, hopefully we'll return to this in Q&A. So some speakers in our first panel said that, well, maybe corruption, we shouldn't talk about corruption just with politics, still corruption. Corruption in Russia went all the way into politics, and Gazprom is a great example, but then it spilled out of Russia on a huge scale. So we, in our brochure, we show that it's actually an effort to find a non-corrupt person on Gazprom board. They are involved in multiple international corruption scandals, from money laundering to various dodgy economic activity. Ukraine is often mentioned with corruption, but you know what? People forget who were behind some of the most biggest gas scandals and corruption stories in Ukraine. Semyon Mogilevich, wanted by FBI, Dmitry Firtash, now also wanted by FBI, all these barter schemes, and I mean, I'm not going to delve into this Ukrainian scandal that's going on right now in US, but actually it shouldn't be called Ukrainian corruption scandal, it should be called Russia corruption story, because all of these figures, they are connected through Firtash, they are connected with Russia ultimately. This corruption is fueled from Russia. And hopefully we'll return to this topic during Q&A. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ilya. And I give the floor to Dmitry Bereshkov, Arctic Consult Company, who are dealing with indigenous community in Russia, and this is about that important question.
Thank you very much. Now I'm located in Norway, and I received their political asylum, but for more than 10 years I was Vice President of the Russian Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North, and work in Russia with indigenous communities. Personally, I'm Italian from Kamchatka, but here I do not represent any indigenous peoples, and it's important thing for me. And actually, I want to start with a small joke. I don't understand why we have so sharp time as 5 minutes, because we have only 4 speakers, and previously it was the same time session and it was 7 speakers. And actually, you know, I several times made this presentation, so I'm a little bit tired about serious things, and I want to start with a joke, small joke. A man in the small town in the evening go with his dog, and you know, for toilet thing, and forget a plastic bag. And when the dog made the deal and made go to the toilet, and was a woman going around the street, and she started a scandal and was very angry. Why are you doing this? It's against the law. And he said, oh, I'm sorry, but don't you forget that we are neighbors, and we are all our house voted for Vladimir Vladimirovich, and we are patriots. Don't you forget this? And she started crying. Yes, we voted for Vladimir Putin, and we are neighbors, and I'm a patriot. And she started crying, and after that she said, okay, you can shit everywhere you want. It's no problem, of course. But actually, that's kind of a real thing that's going on in Russian Siberia. And I want to discuss about the Yamal Peninsula. It's located in the Russian Arctic. And oops, come on. Yeah. And right there, Yamal Peninsula is the biggest place which produces gas for Europe, also generally in Arctic, and everybody thinks that it is very, very harmonic relations there. It's according to Russian propaganda and the Russian mass media, yeah, thank you. And here we can see the map of the Yamal. On the left side you can see a development plan of the gas industry in Yamal Peninsula. On the right side you can see the oil fields of the Yamal Peninsula. In the middle you can see the reindeer herders roads that goes along the Yamal Peninsula. And as you can understand, these cross in many different places. It crosses between them, and of course it's disturbed and a huge problem for indigenous peoples who continue the traditional style of life from the very south of the Yamal Peninsula. Every year they go for hundreds and sometimes 1,000 kilometers from the south to the north for the summer pastures, and these roads and pipelines cut it piece by piece from their pastures. And now there is a huge problem on the Yamal Peninsula that reindeer herders have no pastures for future development, and they have there is a problem to mass slaughter, nearest mass slaughter of the reindeers, because there is no place to herd. And also we can see the pollution, and this is on the left side of the map. This is a place, Bobodenkovo place, the biggest oil gas field in Yamal Peninsula and in the world, one of the biggest in the world. And as you can see, these dark places, it's lifted areas in tundra. Tundra is a very low place, and even 1 or 2 meters lifted area, it's a place. It's not a hills, but 1 or 2 meters up to the sea level. It's a very useful and comfortable place to make infrastructure for gas and oil companies, and also for reindeer herders. They use the same places, and the reindeer herds roads goes along these lifted trade areas. And there is a big conflict between indigenous peoples and gas companies. And according to the gas industry, they took only 1% of the general territory of the region for the infrastructure. But as you understand, these line infrastructure, they cut it huge territories from the reindeer herders. And also there is a problem with pollutions which is going on, and you can see here the general. It's not a concrete. I don't know. It's a concrete Gazprom or Novatek or Lukoil or Rosneft infrastructure, but it's general picture for Russian Arctic tundra, and of course it destroyed the nature for dozens of years, because because grass and moose special plants for reindeers, they grow for decades. It's very slow in the Arctic environment. Yeah, next. Yeah, and also we can meet there with the problem of silence. Gas industry and government, they cover, as we call it, all this covered by the silent veil of silence or siding. And you can see here, this is a building in Yamal, and it's covered by siding, around, and it looks like a very pretty house. But when the Arctic wind take out the house, we can see the old building. And it's the same with the general situation when people, if they meet with the problem with pollution, with criminalizations of their activities, they can't apply for mass media. Then they can't. They met with pressure from police and secret service, etc. And then the last slide I want to show. Yeah, and also we met with a huge consequence now of the climate change, and you can see here the picture from the Siberian plague case. It was a couple of years ago when dozens of thousands of reindeers were killed and died because of this disease, because the permafrost was warming up and these old berries came out on the ground. And generally people, experts assess that in nearest future the traditional lifestyle of Nenets reindeer herders will be under the big threat and could be disappeared.
Thank you, Dmitry, for this detailed description of this situation, and giving the floor to Johan Soro, Institute for Ecology and Action on Ecology. Please.
Thank you very much. Very honored to be here. Actually, I thought it would have been actually better for the yours, because Tina really gave a very, very detailed and erudite description of what it looks like on Yamal, where almost all the gases come from, which is under control pipeline. Now I was actually going off a big picture, so but answered your own is clever. So, but maybe one thing which maybe wasn't quite clear was that the Yamal is really the only place on the planet where you have such a culture, where you have several thousand nomadic reindeer herders with, I think it's like about 500,000, if I'm not wrong, reindeer engaging in year-round full-time nomadism. So you have nomadism in other places of the world, in Africa, but you don't have it anywhere elsewhere in the Arctic, and it's also the only region where after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, this way of life actually began to flourish, began to grow, because in most parts of former Russia, of the former Soviet Union, still Russia, it has been shrinking or even disappearing. So it's really an absolute unique way of life to preserve. And it's not just the way of life, not just the material culture, but it's also spiritual culture, it's also the language. We are in the year of indigenous languages right now, declared by the UN, and the Nenets language is one of the very few indigenous languages in Russia, which is still relatively good, because Dima's own native language, the Italian language, I don't know if anybody still really speaks it. Well, true, he says. So and then compare that to minutes where you still have thousands of speakers, and the places where these languages are spoken are of course those radio-herding extended families working through the tundra. And only in this environment is their language actually preserved. In the village it gets lost, it gets marginalized by Russian. So this huge cultural treasure, which is all connected to the language, will all be lost if the radio disappears, and that's one reason why I find it so important to preserve it. And I mean, my own history with Russia began like 25 years ago, and that was actually in the mid-90s. I first visited also Western Siberia, also the major gas and oil extracting regions of, and I also saw those gas flares that Ilya talked about, and I also was shocked by them. I also saw that the perspective of the indigenous peoples, that well, those oil industries come here and destroy our land, was so, I mean, there was such a sense of sadness and also such a sense of, well, powerlessness connected to that experience. And I saw that my own country, I'm also from Germany, actually buys much of the oil and gas coming from that region. And so we do have a responsibility. And this responsibility, in my perspective, means that we must at least ensure that there's transparency. And that means in case of Yamal, especially, where you have not only the Yamal, the gas going through the pipelines, but also the giant Yamal LNG project, which has become operational in 2017. And where also Germany has been involved, at least to some degree, with export credit insurances and some technical supplies, but of course it's more involved with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline now. And in both cases, the German economic ministry, who is kind of responsible for that there is export credit agents, export credit insurances, ensuring those investments, those German investments, and also all the political backup comes from Germany, that you would have to ensure transparency, that you would not be allowed to just trust what the company says, because in the case of Yamal LNG, which is, again, it's a different project, but I guess the situation is somewhat similar. The company has claimed that they have obtained the free, prior and informed consent from the indigenous population to carry out that project. But if you read the document and know what's been going on at the time on the peninsula, you know that it's totally impossible that they have done so. But it is extremely difficult. It is extremely difficult to come across any reliable information from Yamal, because it's a closed border zone. It's what they call Pogranichная zone in Russian, which is really ridiculous because there's no border to any one country. But it's still, you can't go there without FSB special permission. And so and obviously they want to lock out everybody who is really kind of, who might look too closer at what's going on. And I've also experienced it personally, because last year, after I made some comments on the situation on Yamal at the UN Forum on Business and Human Rights in Geneva, I was, 2 weeks later, when I tried to go to Moscow again and visit my partners there, I was stopped at the passport control, and then I was, just for making some comments, which were not particularly radical, I think, banned from Russia until my 100th birthday. So and I just turned 50, exactly, so exactly for 50 years. And I still am waiting for the German Foreign Ministry to take any serious action on that. And that's what's worrying me, that I don't see that Germany is particularly active in, well, not just in my case. I mean, of course, that's also a very sad thing to me, but I think this whole notion that you need to ensure transparency, that you do have leverage. As one of Russia's biggest economic partners, you do have leverage, and you could enforce transparency if you wanted. But it seems at this level, the political will isn't there. Well, yeah, maybe I should finish there, and I don't know how to move on.
Yeah, thank you, Hannes. I think you hope that Russian FSB wish you a long life till 100 years old, and the one will be finished. But yes, it's a very serious problem, and that what was mentioned, there is not only Yamal, but there is some other areas with declared as strategic important areas for Russia, which has this FSB special control, and in these areas are many indigenous people with as well. It's just about other parts of Russia, it's for sure not border regions. Yes, we are finishing the presentations, and we have two comments already. And the first comment is from Vladimir Asechkin, and it will be in Russian, and Ilya will translate it. Yes, please, but try to be as short as possible. Thank you in advance.
So I'll be translating.
Добрый день, дамы и господа.
Good evening. Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
Меня зовут Владимир Осечкин, я основатель Ассоциации независимых правозащитников и волонтеров ГУЛАГу нет.
My name is Vladimir Asechkin, and I'm head of Association of Independent Law Defenders called ГУЛАГу нет.
In English, no more ГУЛАГ. За прошедшие 8 лет наш сайт ГУЛАГу нет превратился в социальную сеть для родственников заключенных и независимых правозащитников, в которой официально более 18 тысяч человек зарегистрировано на данный момент.
In the last 8 years, our website became a social network for former prisoners and their relatives, and there are now how many? Over 18,000 members there.
Также на сайт обращаются и сотрудники, действующие сотрудники российских тюрем и бывшие сотрудники, которые сообщают нам то, что происходит внутри.
And there are many former and current employees of the Russian prison system who contact us and tell us stories.
В настоящий момент эксперты ГУЛАГу нет работают над исследованием фактов и обстоятельств использования в проекте «Северный поток-2» принудительного труда заключенных на стройках.
So now our experts from our site and our network trying to research how prison labor is used for Nord Stream 2 construction in Russia.
Фактически по принципу, который был в ГУЛАГе СССР, в настоящий момент российские власти и госкорпорации используют принудительный труд заключенных.
So in the same way as the Soviet Union, Russian state and semi-private corporations are using prison labor to construct infrastructure projects.
Мы располагаем данными, сообщениями от сотрудников СИН, от бывших сотрудников СИН, от родственников заключенных, что только за последний год принудительный труд заключенных использовался для строительства подстанции Куземкина для газопровода «Северный поток-2» в Услуге.
In particular, we have a case evidence that from relatives and from former employees of the prison system in Russia that for the station Kuzemkina in Ust-Luga in Leningrad region, prison labor was used last year.
Данную подстанцию Куземкина построили для того, чтобы питать основные насосы и мощности в самом начале Северного потока-2.
So it's at the very beginning of Nord Stream 2 in Russia, and it's essentially a compressor station and facilities to pump gas from Russia.
Нам стало известно, что за последние 5 лет использован принудительный труд тысяч заключенных, которые работали в тяжелых условиях, получали производственные травмы, которые скрывали от СМИ и общественного контроля.
So these prison laborers work essentially for absolutely meager pay, beyond even minimum payment according to official regulations in Russia, and in very harsh conditions, and with lots of traumas, industrial traumas, work traumas that are not reported.
При этом нам достоверно известно, что заключенные были вынуждены работать в тяжелых условиях, осознавая, что в случае отказа от этих работ их ждут репрессии, замена режима назначенного судом наказания на более жестокий, ухудшение условий содержания, избиения и пытки.
So if they refused to work, they would face absolutely horrible repressions, change of their terms, tortures, and other pressure against them.
Только по данным официального сайта УФСИН по Санкт-Петербургу и Ленинградской области, где располагается услуга, только за 2018 год к принудительным работам было привлечено более 2500 человек.
So judging from the official statements of the prison system in the Ust-Luga region, in general about 2,500 prison laborers were used. We don't know exactly how many for Nord Stream, but a big chunk of that number must have been used there.
Согласно данным источников ГУЛАГу нет, в системе ФСИН на данный момент действует 234 цеха металлообработки. Часть из них были задействованы для производства для Северного потока-2.
So there are about 234 facilities that deal with metal constructions and that we used for Nord Stream 2, and the prison labor was used there.
Также нам известно, что труд тысяч заключенных был задействован при стройках инфраструктуры для Северного потока-2, подготовке труб из опорной арматуры, сварочных работах и пошиве спецодежды для рабочих и сотрудников подрядных организаций и заказчиков, в том числе Ленэнерго, Газпрома, Межрегионгаз Санкт-Петербурга, Росгвардии, которая все это охраняла.
So we have different evidence about using the prison labor. Thousands of prisoners were used to build or prepare pipelines and digging, to connect pipelines, to also to sew, to prepare clothes, special work clothes for various subsidiaries or affiliate companies in Energo, Межрегионгаз St. Petersburg, and other state and private entities.
Please sum up.
Исследование фактов нарушения прав заключенных осложнено тем, что власти, конкретно ФСИН и ФСБ, препятствуют раскрытию данных фактов, блокируют проверки и расследования, оказывают давление на обратившихся к нам за помощью заключенных, путем угроз и запугиваний принуждают людей молчать, отказываться от жалоб и претензий к УФСИН по Санкт-Петербургу и Ленинградской области.
So there is a total veil of silence. This expression can be used here because Russian security services, law enforcement prevent any public discussion, and they take repressions against relatives of former employees or any investigators who try to expose this.
Я надеюсь, что до конца года мы успеем выложить в интернет 8-ю серию нашего документального фильма «Хроники ГУЛАГа 21 века», в которой мы расскажем подробнее об эксплуатации фактически рабского труда в учреждениях ФСИН, в том числе принуждении сотен осужденных к работам, связанным с реализацией проекта «Северный поток-2».
So Vladimir is hoping to release more documents and other materials on his website, gathering more information to show how prison labor is used in Nord Stream 2.
Я призываю всех принять посильное участие в защите прав человека в российских тюрьмах и колониях и пресечению порочных практик ГУЛАГа, которым не место на европейском континенте в 21 веке. Спасибо. Thank you very much.
So Vladimir is saying that Gulag is living a life in 21st century and it should not be accepted in Europe or anywhere, and he's asking everyone to stand against this in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Vladimir, thank you for the translation. And there is another comment from Mark Leonov from Netherlands. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. I'm Mark Leonov. I'm representing Rio Talk. I'm very grateful to Free Russia for this opportunity. Unlike my colleagues who are speaking here today, I'm not a specialist on any matters, but so is the majority of young people in Europe. deal with it in the future. That's why I'm sitting here and I'm representing the younger generation. By the time we knew that this conference will take place and that I will attend it, we provided a small research under our peers to find out how well are they informed about this topic. And unfortunately, the majority of younger people have little to no opinion on this topic, despite being actively involved in environmental matters. It is incredibly how little media coverage there is about this topic. This is particularly worrying for us because we are not involved in this kind of discussions. We want to be involved in this kind of discussions. In conclusion, young people can draw an idea that influential parties which are involved in such projects, by the time they are involved, we will actually have no time or even a possibility to hear about it. For example, Nord Stream 2 provides its own channels where it represents this project as a sustainable one, but as we have heard from the panel, it is far from sustainable and this is really questionable. Another topic which I would like to discuss is that obviously it is a conflict of different interests. On one side we have Russia and Gazprom, and on the other side we have a couple of European countries. But if you ask me, a representative of young networks of Europe, what I think we need is a strong European voice, especially in the time which is characterized by big energy competition. Because this question cannot be solved by national countries. What we need is a bigger transnational discussion. We need those kind of transnational think tanks, conferences to involve as much parties as possible to this discussion, because we have to deal with it. Also my generation has to deal with it. So I'm really, once again, I want to thank Free Russia, and I think that this video will be seen by a lot of people, and we also would like to provide our help to spread the word. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the comments. We have around 7 minutes for questions. Please be short and introduce yourself if you have questions, and concretize for whom from the panel you're asking. Yes, please.
Yes, Mikhail Krachenkin. There is a flood of disinformation explaining benefits of Nord Stream 2 that do not exist in reality. But summarizing the whole project, there is nothing on the consumption side, but a lot of environmental damage on the way from the Yamal Peninsula through the Kurgalsky resort area to Germany. So my question is, what should be done and what can be done to fight the disinformation?
I'll answer this on behalf of Evgeny Chirikov and Activatica, because we discussed this in previous conferences. Essentially, the starting point would be to redo environmental impact assessments, and Denmark is still has not released its own environmental impact assessment. We know that Denmark is now asking for feedback from other transit countries, and it's a shocking situation where usually the Scandinavian countries, Finland, Sweden, are so pro-environment, against climate change, but here they gave this documentation quite quickly to Nord Stream 1 and then Nord Stream 2. And from our brochure you will see how many violations there are. And these documents that are on Nord Stream 2 website are fake. So the starting point would be to actually redo those EIA reports and to maybe give leadership to Denmark in this question, because they still haven't released their documents. After that, there are multiple things that can be done. Obviously, the Kurgas Nature Reserve has to be. There should be measures to try to save what is left there, because many plants and animals and so forth have been destroyed irrevocably. But something, there are hundreds of plants, as I understand, and other fauna and flora that can be recovered, or something can be done. And obviously we need new protection for nature reserves to be rebuilt, because Gazprom essentially eradicated it. So, but there are so many things to be done. Greenpeace Germany has proposed many, and NABU, the special NGO that deals with
well, it's one of the biggest conservation unions.
Yeah, there's so many things that can be done in Germany. We can have a separate conference on that.
Can I add also? The problem with these assessments is that the companies, I'm now talking about Yamal, they organize assessment of the separate projects. For example, they organize assessment of the concrete road, a concrete pipeline, a concrete seaport infrastructure. They separated on the several small projects on the several stages. And for example, if you ask how it will be a complex influence on how do we assess the complex influence, they said, oh, it's not our project, it's not our problem. And the other thing is that I think if it is any foreign investments, at least it has to be involved independent researchers for assessment. As Novotek, it's another gas company, organized an LNG project in Yamal. They organize an environmental assessment according to the World Bank standards, and as they received some loan from the World Bank. And when our experts started to ask some wrong questions according to their understanding, finally they didn't invite her to participate in the assessment. So at least it has to be pressure from international society to world business and to world financial structures to involve independent assessment in these issues.
Thank you, Dimitri. Yes, please.
Sorry, I also can't keep my mouth shut, because there is an understanding in international human rights law which is called extraterritorial state obligations, which of course in this case would concern those states who are, whose businesses affect people in other countries, and there's also the term of supply chain responsibility, which is also set out in the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which clearly say that if you are kind of the major buyer of a good produced in another country, you have to pay attention to how the production of this good affects human rights in the country of origin. So one thing I would suggest one can do, which maybe hasn't got a huge impact, but at least could be a piece of the puzzle, would be to include this issue into shadow reports submitted to the UN treaty bodies like the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights and the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination when they consider Germany. Well, of course we do. I personally, I've always been involved in submission of shadow reports on the situation of indigenous peoples in Russia's shadow reports about commenting on Russia's state report, but we could also really focus on what is a country like Germany doing to live up to its extraterritorial obligations, which again, I mean, doesn't have a huge impact. It's a very soft measure, but it could be one thing in addition, at least, which one could do. I don't have the dates in my mind when the next consideration is going to take place, but this would be the road to go down.
I would suggest that the European Commission should have played a much more active role than it has, and that hopefully it's not yet too late. And as long as the European Commission is too passive, I would urge the European Parliament to push the European Commission to become more active, because there is clear breach of EU law, like the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. The whole thing is against EU stated climate objectives. It needs to be investigated whether the environmental impact assessment directive has not been breached, etc. So the Commission should take much more active role than it has till now.
Yeah. Thank you for the answers and thank you for your participation. And yes, the last and the shortest from the Ukrainian lady, please. Give the microphone.
Yeah, though I'm not part of that panel, but I'd like to answer your question. I think very often this issue is being debated amongst experts with another group of experts, instead of going and pushing politicians. The way it works, grassroots, movements should put politicians, they should put pressure on politicians, and then politicians on EU Commission. But this is very elitist, technical, very highly sophisticated issue. So instead of discussing between experts, we need to put together a group of experts who are talking constantly to politicians in Germany, on variety of issues, be it cultural issues or native communities or economic issues or Ukraine issues. You just have to target many politicians because they are being quoted in press, they are being punched with their votes and whatever. It creates political pressure. So this is my advice and plea to you: go and talk to my peers in different countries and make them speak. Once they open their mouths, they will bear political and historical responsibility.
Thank you very much for the comments. We are out of time, and I want to ask Natalia to sum up our conference.
Yes,
and
thank you.
yes, and then we will go to talk with politicians in European Parliament immediately after that.
Let's applaud to the second panel. And thank you all very much. It was really amazing. First of all, I really would like to thank my team because it's a marathon for us. It's the third event in 6 weeks. And 3 different European capitals, so it's quite a task. But thank you. It was a very smart audience, very charismatic moderators, and outstanding panelists, and very good commentators as well. Very great to have a youth voice here as well. So thank you for that. You all were thanking Free Russia Foundation for arranging this, which is right because it was our initiative and we are leading this effort, but it's not completely true because we are very proud, very happy to gather a very powerful coalition of pro-democracy Russians from so many countries, and you can see lots of logos. We have Aktivatika from Estonia, our Free Russia Foundation and our Free Russia House in Kiev, Solidarus and the Forum of Russisch-Sprachige European from Germany, Herzen Foundation from Lithuania, Volia Rossi from Poland, and Russe Liberté from France. So it's great to partner on this important issue. We started to dig into this issue for several years now, and first of all it was connected with corruption around Gazprom. Actually 2 years ago with the Martin Center we presented our first report on this subject, Kremlin gas games in Europe, and since then the more and more we are studying this, the more and more we are amazed how many problems, how many concerns are around it, and it's not only corruption, it's not only that it's very doubtful commercial deal, and when actually it reduces capacity of export of gas to Europe, when it might lead to high prices for Europeans, when there are so many ecological and environmental problems, when it's not good for Russian people, when it violates the rights of indigenous people and many other things. So that's why we would like to continue our campaign, rethink the deal. We don't like it. We don't like Kremlin's economic and political monopoly. We don't like when they spend from the Russian budget at the expense of Russian people and to the detriment of Russian people. So we are going to continue. We'll be happy for all your feedback, for all your support. Thank you so much.
A very quick announcement for those who are going to European Parliament. We are gathering in about 10 minutes in the lobby, 10-15 minutes, and please take your IDs, but don't take your computers.